Perfect. So we've started the recording. Hello, Professor Robert Pape. It's a pleasure to have you on Chico Unscripted, where our goal is to be able to have global thought leaders share their thoughts, their philosophies, their ideas on global matters, but how it impacts Africa, in order to help shape the minds and the hearts of the young leaders who are leading the nations of Africa, the present political leaders, the business leaders, for them to have a global mindset as they're making decisions on a day-to-day basis. My name is Amadou Chico Sissoko, and it's a great honor for me to have you, to be the first to host you, speak to an African audience about things that are happening globally, for which you are one of the experts of the day. So, Professor Pape, before we go into your presentation, I'd like you just to introduce yourself as to why is it important for an African president today, an African business leader today, an African leader to listen to what you have to say, especially at the time where we're in. So from your background to what you've accomplished and where you are today, why is it important for people to listen to you today?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be asked to come and talk about Africa. And this is the first time I have done that. And as we all know, Africa has not gotten very much attention. There's a lot of global consternation about what is happening here as a result of the Iran war and the global repercussions and so forth. But it really is the case that we have not seen a lot of attention to Africa. But I was really quite glad to receive this invitation. And there's two really big things I want to say. And then when I get into the presentation, I'll say a little bit more about my personal background here. But the really two big things I want to say is that what you're seeing with the Iran war is occurring in the midst of a period of time that's a hinge of history moment. This is akin to the end of the Cold War. There are global changes happening. I'll put this in some global context in just a moment. Then there's the Iran war. And this is not a tempest in a teapot. What you are going to see over the coming months and years is a hinge of history moment unfolding. And then the second big point is this is very likely, this hinge is going to envelop Africa in a really serious way. And that's because a lot of the changes that are happening globally and then the impacts for the Middle East, these are not just about temporary disruptions, although they are going to impact Africa in those ways. But there are some bigger issues involved. And that's why I really do welcome this opportunity to explain those two. And I believe for Africa's leaders, this is really a critical time because the wave hasn't quite hit yet, you see. So there's a tidal wave coming and it hasn't quite hit yet. And as although people think, well, just wait till the crisis to catch up with things, crisis is a hard time to catch up with anything because you have too much coming in the inbox all at the same time. So I really do believe now is the right time to speak to African leaders. And I welcome this opportunity here. So thank you very much for inviting me to do this.
Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. So I will allow you to go into the presentation. I think you can share your screen. And
I'll
from
just
there
go right ahead and do
to
that
see.
now. So just let me see if we have these windows here. It looks pretty intuitive. So people just pause for a moment. So people just give me an opportunity. I think we have the opening slide here. So what I want to talk about today is the Iran war and the return of global resource competition, and why what this means for Africa is that Africa is going to enter a new strategic era. That's what I meant by the hinge. And this is already occurring to some extent, but it's going to occur even more. Now, I have been studying escalation, war, escalation, global politics for over 30 years. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago. Before that, I taught for the U.S. Air Force. I taught at Dartmouth College. And I have been focusing on conflicts as conflicts escalate, as they escalate in the conflict itself, as they escalate from the region, as they escalate to the world. And so if you look, some of the most prominent ones I have been involved in are Kosovo, that's 1999, the forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Ukraine war, and then also, of course, the Iran war, which actually starts last June, but of course it's gotten extremely hot in the last few months. Now, the central question connecting these conflicts is, how do limited wars become long wars? Because the fact of the matter is these conflicts all started out as intended to be quite limited wars, some just a couple of days. And so this really is a crucial question. And today, that's a question that increasingly includes Africa. Now, it's also important for listeners in Africa to know that I have advised every White House, West Wing, from 2001 to 2024. That's two Republican, two Democratic White Houses. Now, not as a paid advisor, I want to underscore, I haven't had an official position here. But what I have is I have been advising from the basis of my research and as it applies to these very specific conflicts that were ongoing at the time. And this has been, of course, quite an honor. Now, this, of course, extends beyond, not of course, but also extends beyond the White House. So you can see Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Secretary of Defense. These are sitting Chancellor of Germany, when senators, Jacinda Ardern. So this is these are world leaders, and this has really just been quite an honor that my research was found valuable by so many and across multiple the political spectrum and over time. Now, most recently, I'm particularly well known for starting a Substack called The Escalation Trap just a few days before the bombing of Iran started on February 28. And I laid out what to expect. It was a detailed set of expectations. It was not just a generalized set of expectations. And you can still go to the Escalation Trap Substack and read the original articles. And you'll see that right from the get-go, I'm expecting that tactically bombs will fall, they will hit targets, they will kill leaders as they did, but then this would lead to tactical success, but strategic failure. And then that also part of that failure would be lashing back, that Iran would lash back. They would have opportunities here, take the Strait of Hormuz, and this would be quite difficult to deal with. And this fits historical patterns. This is not just unique to the Iran situation, but this would then also go further because it would create the fear of defeat. This is the fear of defeat that generates the movement of further escalation. And this is what you're seeing right now today. The United States, President Trump cannot accept a evident defeat. He's looking, and has been for months, to look for a way to declare some sort of a symbolic victory here. But the problem is that Iran is not offering him fig leaves. And in fact, Iran is gaining power, as I was explaining before the war started would happen. And this repeated cycle is leading to repeated escalation without success. And this is what keeps the momentum for the conflict going, turning it from a short war into a long war. Now, also, though, and this gets closer to issues with Africa, I laid out further with a big op-ed in the New York Times about in early April that Iran wouldn't just be lashing back, and this wasn't just about military tactics by Iran, but Iran would become an emerging fourth center of world power. That this would have quite dramatic power consequences for the globe. And that is, in fact, what you are seeing. And then the only way to really offset this would be with more military escalation. And that's basically what you have seen for the last almost 2 months now, 2.5 months, where you are seeing the administration go from escalation to non-escalation, but non-escalation means Iran's growing global power, back to escalation, and that is that feeling of being whipsawed. And unfortunately, this can go on for quite some time. This is not really constrained by the fact the world's economy is going to go into a rather dramatic crisis here in the coming months. This is about great power politics, and this is how these short wars turn into long wars with major global implications. Now, today, I just want to say a few words about what the Iran war means for Africa. And it's already clear, I'm sure, to the leaders in Africa that it means there have been maritime routes that have been redrawn. There's a deepening energy crisis that's occurring in Africa. So I'm assuming the leaders, of course, of countries are already well aware of these near-term consequences. The big picture I want to emphasize is that the Middle East war is not just a Middle East story. It is the first major conflict of a new era of global competition over energy, shipping lanes, food systems, minerals, and strategic geography. And in that new era, Africa moves from the margins of world politics toward the center. But by the way, this is not always going to be a happy story. And as this happens, there are major economic and political implications for African states. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is the hidden shock, why Africa is more exposed than most people realize. Just to lay this out, the key vulnerability here is that Africa is threatened by a multifaceted systemic disruption. This is not about missiles hitting African countries. That's not the issue. The issue is that Africa and states in Africa are especially vulnerable to the consequences of the war with Iran because many African states rely heavily on imported fertilizer and fuel. And the key transmission mechanisms are oil prices, fertilizer flows, food inflation, and currency depreciation. And it's really important to underscore something that's not really hitting the major media, which is the next African food crisis may begin not in African farms, but with distant shipping lanes. Now, what I'm essentially trying to tell you is that a chain reaction is occurring. And it's starting with a disruption in Hormuz. And it is having economic shock waves across multiple different economic layers here that are impacting Africa. But at the end, step 7 there is social and political instability here. And this is something that's really important to understand, which is as we go forward, the instability that we are witnessing now, and mostly what we're witnessing is the regional instability in the Middle East here. This too can grow over time, and not just in Asia, not just in Europe, not just in the United States. That's where most of the attention has been, but to Africa as well. And it's essentially a chain reaction here. Now, Africa's food vulnerability is in many ways the most acute. So I just wanted to show you the share of fertilizers that are imported by sea that originate from the Persian Gulf in 2024, which is the year that the most recent data is from. Now, you'll look at a long list of those countries here on the right, and what you're going to see as you let your eye go up and down is that half of them are in Africa. That is, when you look at the top list here, this is not evenly spread out around the world with the results of fertilizer. This is heavily concentrated in Africa. And so this is why it's really been disappointing thus far that the international media has not paid more attention to the coming issues here, because this is very easy to see coming. It is not something we need to wait. This is a fully predictable unfolding chain reaction, especially with respect to Africa's acute food vulnerability. However, there's a broader context I want to put this in so that we understand that even this is not just a one-off issue with the Iran war, because that we are seeing also the end of a global order that has been that coming unglued for years and is now coming unglued even faster. Essentially, what you are seeing is the world is transitioning. This is not just about Iran. The world is transitioning from an old order. That old order was an era of globalization, open markets, predictable relationships and partnerships. Sea lanes were secure, they were open, free, strong dollar system, rules and institutions that you could really count on. Well, all of those elements in what we call the era of globalization are all changing. They're all moving to a new world of much more intense strategic competition, where the great powers aren't just competing trade rivals, they're competing for control of resources, actual control. President Trump says there's something special about that word control. Well, he's not alone in thinking that. There's resource security issues. This, of course, is the focus on critical minerals, energy, and food. Well, that's not just about what's happening in the Middle East. You'll recall just a few months before that, we have Greenland. A few months, then also we had Venezuela. This is something that's happening over and over again, and that's leading to then various contested corridors, financial fragmentation, where the dollar is declining in importance, and sovereign choices now are fundamentally changing. This is because we're in a new era, not simply dealing with the ripple effects of one-off war. Now, the global shift, to put it in sort of a slightly different terms here, in the old system, we assumed a peace-prone system. And that peace-prone system meant open sea lanes, global trade, predictable energy, stable dollar flows. What we're seeing now is it's not just all four of those are under pressure simultaneously, but we're moving to a war-prone system, militarized system, where great powers are not just competing, as I said, merely as economic rivals in trade. They're competing over resource control, which involves military force. And that's what you're seeing emerge over time, and it is now accelerating. Now, this is where Africa enters the picture. And this is why Africa is no longer going to be geopolitically on the periphery. It is going to become the world's largest reservoir of strategic minerals, young labor, and untapped geopolitical leverage. We have so many stories about the untapped potential of the Arctic. Well, this is about to become much more serious in Africa. And the question for Africa is not whether outside powers will compete in Africa. They already are. The question for Africa going forward is whether African states can convert competition into sovereignty instead of dependency. That's the big question here for Africa and African leaders going forward. They need to think hard about. Now, the risk I'm telling you is a recolonization risk. And as African leaders will undoubtedly already know, historically, there have been periods of global resource insecurity, and these produce external intervention, proxy conflicts, military basing, foreign-backed security arrangements, and debt dependency, and above all, elite capture, what we call often indirect imperialism. Well, that was the 19th century scramble for Africa in a nutshell. And what I'm really telling you and really saying is African leaders have to be prepared for a much more intense 21st century scramble for strategic minerals and resources in Africa. And so the danger today is not exactly classical colonialism. I don't really think the era of the formal empires is coming back. I think the danger is dependency disguised as partnership, where the partner is coming in with very heavy military forces as well. Now, Africa, as I was saying, is ripe for being at the more at the center of this growing resource competition among the great powers for control of the resources. And it's because of the critical minerals that are scattered throughout almost all of Africa. And I'm just showing you this on the left, but also the oil, gas, and gold. And as gas and oil become more problematic in the Persian Gulf, this will surely be pointing multiple great powers toward Africa. And this would hardly be a surprise that suddenly, I don't mean next week, but I mean in the coming months, and say starting in January of 2027, there are new plans, new ideas, new approaches, new adventures even related to Africa. This is not something to worry about 5 years from now. This is something to worry about 5 months from now. This is likely to become the very near term. Now, we're already seeing significant foreign military presence in Africa, and you can see that in multiple ways. This, too, I'm assuming the African leaders will know about in some detail. The point I just want to make is that Africa's leverage is actually increasing. It may not feel that way, but the leverage only matters if leaders recognize that they have it. And this is going to be crucial because Africa is going to become more at the center of great power competition than before. So what can African leaders do, and what should they do? The key thing is they need to think hard about whether they will become autonomous in the future or dependents in the future. And those that survive are not just going to be the richest, they're likely to be the most autonomous going forward. So what does that mean? That means food sovereignty by already increasing now local fertilizer production and strategic grain reserves. It means energy diversification now by reducing dependence on imported refined fuel. It means multi-alignment diplomacy to avoid becoming locked into any single bloc. And it means strategic mineral bargaining, moving from raw extraction to processing the value on value chains. And it also means thinking about regional security coordination, building African-led rather than outsourcing security architecture to the major powers. Now, also, I just want to point out, there's tremendous opportunities here for linkage in future relationships. So as those major powers are going to want to control minerals, oil, those hard resources, this creates leverage for food, and food becomes a critical resource for political power, political stability going forward. So I would just point out that the issue here is not one-off deals and increasingly one-off deals, which are going to be then vulnerable over time. It's building more solid linked relationships. So how do you think about the future? I believe the structural pressures are going to be real on Africa, but I also believe that leadership still matters. I believe the countries that recognize the systemic change early can adapt earlier than others. And Africa has one enormous advantage, which is much of the continent's future is still unwritten. And the fact that it has been on the periphery for some time is a tremendous advantage because there's less rigidities already built into the system. So with that, I'd like to stop here and take questions. And I just very much appreciate, again, the opportunity to have offered my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that detailed presentation. And as I was listening to you, I must be extremely honest with you. I was more worried than I was inspired or hopeful, because there are certain things that are systemic to the current situation of the leadership in Africa that make it extremely hard for the countries in their current state in the next 5 months to be autonomous. So first of all, there is the dependency on debt, may it be European debt, American debt, grant funding for many African nations. Very few have been able to transform their local resources to be able to feed their own people. Very few have strategic reserves for food or for fertilizer. And very few have leadership that is equipped in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge, in terms of global understanding to be able to negotiate from a point of strength. Because generally when these loans arrive, it's also where a lot of them make their own personal money through corruption. So that is something that really scares me. But then there are two other instances that I also want to point out to you so that you can then expand further. Is one, recently, the richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote, had set up the largest refinery of oil in Nigeria. And to set up this project, he had to fight a lot of the multinationals who were benefiting from exporting crude oil directly from Nigeria, and who, with the other local leaders, did not want for the crude oil to be processed locally. And so he had to fight against many cartels in order to set up that refinery. And now they're moving towards a place where Nigeria can use its own crude oil, process it, and export it. And when this crisis started, as a visionary as he is, he saw the opportunity and started moving across the continent, went to East Africa to negotiate to set up another refinery. The IFC and World Bank issued some sort of warning to Nigeria to ensure that he doesn't have a sort of monopoly. But if you're thinking from a broader perspective, we wonder whose interests are they defending. So that's one. The second thing that is during the colonial era, France was the country that had the largest number of colonies across Africa. And the French country in the Second World War, it leveraged those countries as landing pads, as places to have recruit soldiers that would fight for France. And it was a way also to project power, because France at that time was getting a lot of resources from those countries in Africa. However, over time, many of those countries have rejected the French in their country. Niger has kicked the French out. Mali has kicked the French out. Burkina Faso has kicked the French out, which led to Senegal also asking for the French troops to leave some of their military camps. Ivory Coast also asked the same. So the French don't have that same influence as they used to have. And so in some cases, we see that they try to fund militias in order to try to organize coups in some of these countries for regime change. And these are things that were happening after the independences that we've seen, which led to presidents who were in power for many years serving the foreign interest than the interest of their local citizens. And so when I look at those three things, one, lack of preparation for such a crisis in terms of human capital, in terms of strategy. Two, the players who want to be able to build local African industries are being constrained, I have to fight against foreign institutions that are designed to support and promote foreign companies in Africa. So not allowing African economies to develop. And then the third, there's many African countries today that are led by military soldiers who arrived in power through coups, who they too are controlling their countries not through a democratic process, but are anti-America, anti-French, and maybe pro-Russia, pro-China, in order to protect their interests. How do you see then the continent, even though the continent is diverse, as we say, it's one continent, 54 countries, how do you see them being able to adapt to this current situation while facing these, structural problems that are there?
Yeah. So I have a very simple answer for this. They either adapt or they're going to die. So the problem here is that this is not like the last 30 years. So corruption, of course, ripe here, and corruption has been going on in Africa for as long as I can remember being a graduate student in this here. But the real issue here that I'm presenting to the leaders themselves personally is they're now up against a situation where it's not just are they the best, most corrupt person within their local area, within the capital, so to speak. Are they going to be able to withstand these great powers? And you're seeing this with President Trump, where he's just going to decide he wants oil from a country, and he's just going to start killing the leaders. And then those leaders here aren't just going to get a sweetheart deal. They're going to be lucky to keep half of what they've currently got, maybe even a quarter, because what he's going to do is he's going to just keep killing his way through them until he gets the resources and the profits from the resources. So this is not a situation of where the status quo of corruption is going to lead to longevity here for the leaders. So it's really up to them. But it is not a situation where this world that we're moving into is going to be a far more aggressive world because the great powers, as you're seeing with President Trump, they're not simply, trying to get let's spend 5-10 years, let's really work on this situation, let's go find our puppet here and so forth. No, they're in a hurry and they want those resources now. And they don't just want nominal control of the resources. They want really quite direct control and the profits from the resources themselves. So that's what I'm saying. This is a world that is going to change fast. And you're already seeing it with Maduro. You're seeing it with President Trump in Greenland. This is not nice guy here. This is somebody who's willing to use assassination immediately and other tools to get their way. And I think that this is something the leaders in Africa have to take much more seriously. So I don't doubt that what they have done up until now has worked for many of them. And I'm not trying to say that's a morally good thing either. I'm not trying to condone corruption here. I'm just being very blunt about why there's a reason to adapt here and to change. And that is because without real leverage here against the coming encroachment, and that leverage is often about building relationships with society. Now, maybe not all of society, maybe not every group in society. I'm not saying that it's Thomas Jefferson and the American Revolution. That's not where I'm going. I'm just simply pointing out for survival purposes here, there needs to be a wider change. And that wider change is to give real reasons why it's not so easy from the perspective of the would-be neo-colonialist to simply come in, knock off a few leaders, put in their new person that they think is going to be in charge, and then they get not just a relationship, they get 80% of the money going to Washington, D.C., or going elsewhere in the other major powers. That's really the future, and that's what's at issue here. And if they don't adapt, I don't think they're going to be there.
Very interesting, and still very scary because
well, it's a blunt
I look at it
it's
as
a blunt. I'm sorry to not be very happy about it, but it is a blunt. Sort of history here has blunt lessons, and what you're watching is we're moving back to an extremely war-prone world, where the countries that are using force are the countries you thought were supposed to be preventing that, such as the United States. And they're not just using force in limited ways with gunboat diplomacy. They're literally killing leaders here or taking them out in other ways over and over again. I see that this may go on for some time because the resource competition as we move into AI is going to become incredibly intense.
You said the competition towards AI?
Yes, because the competition towards AI means that you can get much more out of the resources you control. And so that is what I think is you are seeing that this move toward AI is not independent of what China's doing, say in Pakistan, or China's doing as it's broadening its resource control. Same with President Trump. I think these are going in parallel. Now, I don't think it's strategically smart, by the way. I wouldn't advise the White House. In fact, I'm going to, not in the next few months, but I already have ideas for a new book over the next year or two to really try to explain to the world that the world they're moving to and the way they're happening is going to shoot themselves in the foot. But that said, that's going to take a while. So, so I'm not telling you it is the wise thing for the great powers to do, but nonetheless, they're doing it. And the area that has not really been the focus yet here is really Africa, and it's been the focus some, of course, but it's been focused for most in a modest way. That I think is going to change, because when you start to look at what are you going to do with 20% of the world's oil locked up by Iran, Africa starts to look really enticing. When you start to look at what are you going to do with all these critical minerals that you need for these advanced systems that you want to build, Africa starts to look critically. So if Greenland looks good, if Venezuela looks good, Africa is also going to look good. And that's what I'm saying. Africa is going to be on the menu, but it's not there yet. And it's going to take some the countries, the leaders that have more the strategic ability to adapt to the new environment. Those are going to be the ones that are going to survive here. And I don't think the old ways were just being the toughest one on the block is going to be enough, because these new powers coming in here, they're going to be even tougher, and it's just going to be harder here, as you saw in, say, Maduro. Maduro, the Americans were able to infiltrate his personal security guard to the point that they killed, within just not even an hour, all the security guard, did not kill him, okay, and got him out. Just think about that for a moment. So he had quite a security guard around him. He had a safe area around him, and that wasn't good enough, because he was up against the United States of America and the special forces of the United States of America. So as tough as it might appear that the leaders can insulate themselves with their current methods and their current approaches, I don't think that they stand a chance here up against real great powers when they decide they're coming here, which unless there is more support. And that's what you see in Iran. The support here in Iran is not just three leaders. It's not just limited to the capital. It's much broader. And that's why America, what we've done is we've touched off not a collapse inside of Iran. What we've done, it's not a Maduro solution. What we've done is we've touched off the fourth center of world power. And that's because Iran had a different approach right from the get-go here. And they understood their whole regime since '79 has been built expecting a new imperial assaults, so to speak. It hasn't been now there's been a lot of corruption there too. Okay, I'm not doubting that, but this is really this choice of a real leader. You see what I mean? And I'm talking to them directly, like I would in the West Wing of the White House. I'm just saying, this is the real choice. They have real choices. But I think the idea that the old methods they can go through without serious adaptation, I just don't think they're likely to withstand the onslaughts that are going to be coming. Those resources are too important to those great powers.
Yeah. Professor Pape, what do you think African leaders can learn from Iran? and how Iran has been able to resist. One of the things that you've really laid out over the past few weeks, over the past few months, is the simple fact of resisting a superpower is the same as victory. And what you're also laying out earlier in terms of Africa, it's not the strongest, but it's the one that can become autonomous, that one that can become self-reliant, the one that can be able to use its own resources to be able to cater for itself. What can they learn from Iran?
Well, the big thing to notice is that for as long as I've had graduate students writing dissertations on Africa, because quite a few have over the last 30 years, what you see is that leaders tend to want to focus in Africa on control of the capital itself. Which has, of course, makes an awful lot of sense in an era of globalization with the IMF and so forth and so on. So there's a tremendous fit between, I think, what you described as the weaknesses or the challenges of the current situation of Africa and the era of globalization. I think that was a fit. I'm not happy about it. I'm not pro corruption or anything, but it was a fit. That is now changing. Here. That globalization era is fundamentally changing. And I think that this is going to lead to, now in Iran's situation, this was not just simply about control of Tehran. This was always much, much broader. Now, of course, they were incredibly brutal here, and so I wouldn't be defending their methods either. But the bottom line is, this was not simply about focusing on he who controls the capital controls power, and that's enough because you've got then the globalization networks that you can take advantage of and so forth as personal patronage. That's just simply going to break down here over time. And I think that this is, if the leaders stick with that model, they're going to look more like Venezuela than they are like Iran. That's the bottom line. So that's what happened in Venezuela. And now Venezuela hasn't turned out quite as profitable for Trump as he would have hoped, because it is the case that in order to, he wanted not just the current oil out of Venezuela, those profits, he wanted to dramatically develop that resource here. And so that really has been a limit. The oil companies are not willing to go in under those circumstances here because those civilian contractors are way too vulnerable. And so forth. However, over time, he may find solutions to that problem. And what I'm just simply telling you is that that's the big advice here, is you've got your models. You can go down the route of Venezuela, in which case you're going to start taking haircut after haircut after haircut here, or you're going to go down the route of Iran, and it's close. Now, of course, they'll be somewhere in the middle, obviously. But it's up to them to choose. And you're seeing that President Trump will certainly be looking for more Venezuelans to pick on in the future and fewer Irans.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. As we end this interview, let's think a little bit of a hope or a positive outcome. What could be for yeah, because we have to give hope.
I'll tell you what the big hope is. The big hope would be that you use the linkage here where there's a food crisis coming. You have the assets of the minerals, and you use those crises to build future wider political support. Now, it may only be slightly wider. I'm not naive to imagine that this is all going to, again, change overnight into something that looks like a different dynamic altogether. But that said, that is actually quite an opportunity, because that's how that's the underutilized power resource of the African leaders, which is how do you change the dynamic of power here so it becomes a virtuous cycle as opposed to a losing doom cycle, as I'm describing it here. And I think that's the optimistic side. And of course, that would be good for humanity, because you'd have fewer people facing those food and malnutrition disease crises. But I don't think this is going to be a world in which you're going to get, say, massive amounts of foreign aid coming in from the West in order to bail out. This is not likely the future, because Europe is going to be in trouble economically. A lot of the other folks in the West, say in the Trump administration, they don't believe in it from the get-go. So this is not, you're not getting the globalization dynamics here are fading fast. And so that's why I'm trying to point them to a different world here, where there's a different cycle. And that's where the real opportunities are and the good that could come out of this.
Can I just ask, what is the name that you're giving to this new era that we're going into, away from the globalization? What are we going towards?
I call it, and this is not a good name just yet here, the era of neo-imperialism.
Neo-imperialism. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm sorry to say
I hope that's
what I'm seeing directly from it's coming from the West again.
Yeah.
But I do have to go.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Absolutely. This has been really
terrific.
Yes,
for sure. Thank you so much. I'll keep following up, and hopefully we'll do more. Yes, I'm looking forward to further conversations. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, I'm going to run. Bye-bye.
Okay.